Hello and welcome to the Book Club Review. I'm Kate.
I'm Laura.
And this is the podcast about book clubs and the books that get you talking.
Today we bring you Bookshelf, an episode dedicated to the books we've been reading outside of book club, the ones we get to pick and choose.
And so, on my list, Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk, The Shepherd's Hut by Tim Winton, and The Book You Wish Your Parents Had Read by Philippa Perry.
And on my list we have The Game of Kings by Dorothy Dunnett, Kate Atkinson's Transcription, the short story Mr. Salary by Sally Rooney, and The Age of Light by Whitney Scharer.
Keep listening to hear what we thought of them and whether there might be any gems in there for your next book club pick.
All that coming up here on the Book Club Review. So
Jinx.
So it feels like it's been a while since our last bookshelf, and I can tell you from my perspective, it's because I've been so bogged down in book club books.
Yeah, it's been a bit relentless recently.
It has. I don't know how we managed to do this to ourselves.
Well, and let's not forget, I'm in 3 book clubs because I've got my mum's book club.
You're a mad woman. But we have finally managed to carve out some reading time of our own, and we have 7 books to discuss.
Yeah, and you actually have a physical stack, whereas a couple of mine were audio.
You've had a recent conversion to audiobooks.
Well, this is the thing. So I traditionally have found audiobooks just not for me. I find them too slow. Often I don't like the voice of the person who's reading. That sort of bothers me because, you know, when you read, the voice you hear in your head is the voice the writer is sort of projecting, and I don't know why that always just works really well for me. That's quite vivid, and then to have someone reading that and to have that voice almost imposed on me, I'm not crazy about that. And they're just so slow, aren't they? Because it's just the amount of time it takes someone to actually read the words. Whereas, you know, when you're reading something, your eye just sort of skims down the page and before you know it.
It is because we're such skim readers, though. Everyone's like, well, I don't know.
I think even reading carefully and with attention, I can still read a lot more quickly than I can hear someone talk.
Yes, that's fair.
And so my first venture, because I just thought, well, I need to get over this because I'm quite busy. I don't have a lot of time for reading. And so actually I can really see how audiobooks could really help me find the time to read a few more things than I'm able to currently, because I can sort of fit it in when I'm doing the laundry or, you know, out pushing the baby around. I started with Becoming by Michelle Obama, which she reads, and I had heard it was great, and so I downloaded that. And I was a bit dismayed because it's 19 hours long. And, you know, as discussed, don't have that much time. And also she reads it in this really measured way that I have to say I came to really appreciate, but in the beginning just drove me wild. I was like, come on, Michelle. And it's very detailed, and there's an awful lot of background about her family and her upbringing, which again I was a little bit impatient of at the beginning. As I sank into this book and really grew to appreciate it, I understood why all that's so important. You understand the kind of choices she makes and the things that she's trying to do, and you really understand because you have such a kind of keen awareness of where she came from and what her experiences were growing up. But I had to kind of stop and give myself a talking to and just say, look, you have to have a different attitude to this. You can't just skim through this and polish it off and then rattle on to the next thing. You know, you've got to just sink into it and give it some time and really listen and just be a bit more kind of, I don't know, flow about it. And so I tried to do that, and I started listening to it when I was off doing a run in the morning, and I just grew to love it so much. I loved her voice. I loved her story. It's so inspiring and empowering and really, in the best way, working to slightly change you as a person and try and, I guess, inspire you to make better choices and to do what you can to try and help people or do good in the world. I think it was just really that, without ever being kind of hectoring or didactic. It's just in this really gentle way of telling her own story. You just can't help but be really moved by it and what ultimately she was able to accomplish. So I loved it. But then, having finished that, I then tried to listen to the Marlon James, which I have to say it was a very different experience. So anyone familiar with the writing of Marlon James, we did his A Brief History of 7 Killings for book club. It's quite long. It's extremely violent. I actually really loved it. I thought it was brilliant. Not everyone in my book club agreed, so it was a good book club book. But it's just very, very full on, graphic, kind of.
His writing's almost textural.
Yes, exactly. You sort of feel it, don't you?
Yeah.
And it can be really shocking. And so it wasn't really much of a surprise to me to find that Black Leopard, Red Wolf very much carries on in the same groove. The problem I was having with it was that I would be just sort of pottering around the supermarket with the baby, you know, considering which tuna to buy. And in my ears, there'll be this, and he threw her across the room and her brains fell out as her head smashed against the thing and this and this. And I was just like, no. So I don't know. There was just too much of a disconnect between what I was hearing and what I was actually doing. So that didn't work for me. And also, I think that was probably even 2 times longer than Michelle Obama. Yeah. And I was just like, I haven't got time to this. And I'm not sure I want to sink into this anyway. So that didn't work for me. So then I thought, okay, audiobooks, not for me. But then I interviewed Anna Bailey-Carris of Australian podcast Books on the Go. And almost in passing, just at the end of all of the other books that she recommended, she mentioned The Shepherd's Hut by Tim Winton. And I looked that up on Audible and it was only 6 hours. And I thought, oh, great, I could probably just squeeze that one in. And so I downloaded that and started listening and I was blown away. It was so good. I would be standing stock still in the middle of rooms, just almost holding my breath because I didn't want to miss a word. It's read by Kate Mulvaney, who also did his previous book, Dirt Music. I'll read the little blurb about it. For years, Jack C. Clacton had dreaded going home. His beloved mum is dead, and he wishes his dad was too, until one terrible moment leaves his life stripped to nothing. No one ever told Jack C. Clacton to be careful what he wishes for. And so Jack C. runs. There's just one person in the world who understands him, but to reach her, he'll have to cross the vast salt lands of Western Australia. It's a place that harbours criminals and threatens to kill those who haven't reckoned with its hot, waterless vastness. This is a journey only a dreamer or a fugitive would attempt. Fierce and lyrical, The Shepherd's Hut is a story of survival, solitude and unlikely friendship. Most of all, it's about what it takes to keep hope alive in a parched and brutal world.
I am very intrigued by that one. There's something about the name, The Shepherd's Hut, too.
Do you know, the one thing I thought about this book, given how much I loved it and how much I appreciated this brilliant narrative that absolutely keeps you turning the pages. It's really plot driven and there's a real hook to kind of keep you guessing until the very end. The characters are amazing. I just love them. They absolutely leap off the page, particularly this main character, this boy who you want to like and you want to sympathise because his background has just been so awful and you know what he's been through. But at the same time, it's hard to because he's not really a particularly sympathetic character, and I love that about it. Nothing is ever black and white. And he writes about the landscape really beautifully, and you really sort of feel like you're there, the heat and the kind of things that he sees. And the one thing afterwards, when I sort of was sitting back and just thinking, oh, that was just so amazing, I loved it so much. And the one thing I didn't like about it was the title, because I just felt it was really reductive and actually not really the most obvious thing to call the story. And it was a shame, really, because I almost wondered whether people might overlook it because the title doesn't really give you much. And I think before I read it, I had a completely different idea that those words sort of evoked for me. And then when I read the book, it was just nothing like I'd imagined. And I just thought it's a tiny thing, but I just thought if I'd been in the meeting
and the publisher's meeting,
having read the book, I would have been like, Tim, do we really want to call it The Shepherd's Hut?
I think I like the title because I loved the book The Shepherd's Life.
Yeah, nothing in any way relating to James Rebanks's his book about shepherding in the Peak District in the
Lake District.
So yeah, can't recommend that highly enough. I think it would be amazing for book club. I loved the audio. It was really, really good. It's interesting having it read by a female narrator when the main character is male, but it didn't matter at all. It made perfect sense. He's young and that voice was just brilliant. And I think there's a lot in it that's quite confrontational and interesting on ideas of masculinity and power and good and evil and doing the right thing and how we do that I think would lead to lots of interesting discussions. I think it would be a really good one for book club.
And at 6 hours long, it must be quite a slight read as well.
Well, I mean, for me, that sort of felt exactly right. You know, it was a sort of week or so of just listening to it in odd moments. And then towards the end, I started contriving moments just so that I can...
That's a sign of a good book.
No, I'll go down to the co-op. It'll be fine. I'll go and get those things just so that I can have a bit more time with it.
Well, I want to read that one. That sounds really good.
A nice amount of time. But then it made me think, okay, so maybe the thing with audiobooks for me is that they need to be relatively short and maybe they do need to be a kind of good plot-driven story rather than something a bit more abstract or something that you really need to concentrate on or sink into. You know, this sort of grabbed me at the very beginning and then just kind of pulled me through and that was perfect. So I think, if anything, I've learned something about my audiobook choices from now on.
Very good. My recommendation has always been non-fiction for audiobooks. and fiction for books. But it sounds like if the plot is gripping enough and the writing compelling enough, you can be won over.
Well, and so I do have a non-fiction audio, but I want to hear about one of yours. Tell me about one of yours next.
Well, I read Kate Atkinson for the very first time, which is rather unbelievable because she's such a bestseller. Have you read her before?
Yes, I've read Life After Life, which I really loved, and I'm sure I've read something else by her.
Life After Life was actually a book club book of mine, maybe 5 years ago or so, and I just didn't get through it. It was one of those moments where I let slip my tyrannical grip on what our book choice is, and someone else suggested it and we chose it, and then I sulked and didn't want to read it and didn't like the premise.
Just sort of passive-aggressive experience.
Yes, yeah, I think that's true.
I was quite pleasantly surprised by it because I thought I would find this idea of a character who keeps kind of reliving life again and again and different things happening each time. I thought I would find that really annoying, and the big surprise for me about that book was that actually I didn't. I was really invested in it, and I kind of liked it when she got to start over, and I would see what would happen the next time.
I was never really sure where Kate Atkinson sat in the literary sphere. You know, was she quite commercial, popular fiction? Is she more literary? And I stole this book off my colleague's desk. So I was flicking through the acclaim at the beginning. Alison Pearson for the Sunday Telegraph says, "No other contemporary novelist has such supreme mastery of that sweet spot between high and low, literary and compulsively readable." So I was like, okay, all right. So she kind of bridges popular fiction, pick it up at W.H. Smith on the half-price pile, or a literary treat. I mean, she has won awards. She's won the Costa Book Prize a few times, I think.
And there are the crime books, the Jackson Brodie novels. I think I've read one of those as well, which I liked.
Okay. So Transcription is her most recent novel, and it is a spy novel. Now, I don't read very many spy novels, really my thing, but it seemed intriguing enough. And to be fair, I read it in 48 hours. I borrowed it on Friday night and I had finished it by Sunday night.
Good page turner.
Yeah, well, it's funny. It's not even that it was a page turner so much as it was sort of compulsively readable, even though not all that much happened and I wasn't all that curious about what was going to happen. And when the reveals that you would expect from a spy thriller come up, I wasn't that surprised, but there was something quite relaxing about reading it. And I don't know if I'd seek out any of her other books actively, but I think it's kind of a light read and certainly a palate cleanser after so many heavy tomes for book club. It was great.
Hit the spot.
Yeah. I actually think it would be a good book club book because I felt quite let down by a lot of things that happen, and I want a second opinion on that. I'd quite like to debate it and see what people think.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Another palate cleanser on my mission to kind of reclaim my own reading was Sally Rooney's short story Mr. Salary, which is in a standalone edition, part of the Faber Stories series.
They are lovely, those books. I love those editions.
It is very slight. It is very readable. It is very Sally Rooney.
I have read it. I read it online. I think it's on the Irish Times, on their website. You can read it there. And I read it after we'd read Normal People, and I was kind of just researching her and finding out more about her, and I read that, and I actually loved Mr. Salary and was quite uncritical of Mr. Salary.
Really?
Yeah, in a way that I didn't feel with the novels Normal People and Conversations with Friends. For me, I just felt like it worked much better in short form.
Interesting, because I read Mr. Salary and thought, oh, Kate has a point. Sally Rooney is just writing the same story and the same characters again. You know, we have very articulate, intelligent, young, seemingly quite attractive Dubliners in a slightly ambiguous relationship with lots of sexual tension.
Good banter. Good
conversation. And it just felt very familiar. And I thought, okay, all right, maybe she is a bit of a one-trick pony. She is still young, so I want to see all the... I'm going to take this metaphor too far. I want to see all the tricks she has. But, I mean, her subject matter might well expand as she gets older and has more life experiences. But I would like to see her stretch herself.
Why should she change? She's just been feted, acclaimed. You couldn't get more gushing praise.
Because she's capable of it. You know, when you read Normal People, you were so keen to hear the story of Connor's mother, who was a single mother who would have raised this child alone in this tight-knit small town community, and you're like, I wanted to know about her. What did she go through?
Yeah.
So I think if Sally Rooney used her imagination to kind of expand beyond her own life experience, she'd tell us incredible stories.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's
so
good.
That's the reason. Not to be critical, to be encouraging, as you say.
And it's quite unusual for me to almost keep my eye on a writer in that way. Often I kind of don't seek out other books by a writer I really enjoyed, because I somehow don't want to spoil the book of theirs that I really loved. You know, sometimes you read something else and it's not quite as good, or it somehow changes your view of the thing that you read, and it's very kind of limiting, but, you know, it just sort of works for me. But with her, I would be really intrigued and kind of keen to read what she writes next. Mainly because if it is more of the same, I know that's going to be good. It's not like I'm worried that it's...
and enjoyable.
Yeah, but she's that good. I think I've plenty of confidence that, you know, whatever she writes will be good. But yeah, it'll be really interesting to see where she does go.
An odd parallel, an unexpected parallel. Have you ever heard of Dorothy Dunnett?
No.
Neither had I, which surprised me because she appears to be a fringe literary icon similar to Georgette Heyer, but in a completely different genre.
Oh.
Yes, exactly. Dorothy Dunnett wrote historical novels, best known for 2 series, and I read the first book in the Lyman Chronicles series, which is set in 16th century Scotland. And our hero, or anti-hero, is Francis Lyman, and he's a nobleman, but he's an outcast for betraying his country, betraying Scotland to the English, and he's now roaming the country with a band of outcasts, committing crimes. But is he, or is he doing something more subtle? And he's one of those dreamy protagonists who is incredibly charming, incredibly articulate. He can kind of do anything and is always one step ahead of everyone around him. It's very well researched. It's very historically accurate as far as I can tell. The thing about Dorothy Dunnett is as soon as you kind of find out about her and mention it to people, it comes out of the woodwork that she's this icon. So my friend Phil was like, I read Dorothy Dunnett series, like they're big books, you know, and in the series there's probably 3 or 4 and they're all about 600 pages and there's 2 series. Phil was like, I reread them every 5 years.
Really?
And Sally, who's in your book club, commented on Instagram. She's like, oh yeah, I mean, they're amazing. And she gets better because she wrote that very first one when she was quite young and then kept on writing. So you could see her progression and her mastery of the novel form progress over time. So I bashed through that on holiday and then I did read the second one. But by that point, I was like, okay, all right, I need to step back. But I think the next time I go on holiday, that's probably what I'll go back to. So you'd love them, I think.
Is it summer reading?
Yeah.
Hey, we've identified a book that would qualify as summer reading.
If you like historical novels. But otherwise, I think it can be very dry. In book 2, he heads to the French court to protect the infant queen, Mary Queen of Scots. Anyway, so you kind of get to know about history at the same time as just kind of like romping through ridiculous escapades.
That sounds good.
Similar to Golden Hill, there is a moment where they run across the rooftops on a wild goose chase.
It's always good to have a rooftop scene. Well, there are no rooftop scenes in Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead. I steered my mum's book club towards this one because I wanted to read it. It's by a Polish writer called Olga Tokarczuk. I went over the road and asked some Polish builders how you pronounce her name. Now, I can't roll my R's the way that they can, but it's Tokarczuk, apparently. I wondered if they would have heard of her because in Poland she is extremely well known and she's published many, many books. She's had a long and very successful writing career, and previously she worked as a psychotherapist. It's kind of funny, she stopped being a psychotherapist when she realised one day she was sort of listening to a patient and she just sort of realised that she had bigger problems than he did. And at that point she thought, okay, maybe this isn't the right career for me. I was interested in her because her book Flights won the International Booker Prize last year. And I had thought I would read that, but then when I did some reading about it, I have to say it sounded a bit hard work. And I do find, especially in periods where I'm busy and I just don't have a lot of time for reading, I kind of find it really hard to carve out the time to really focus on things like that.
And this edition looks like it might be hard work.
Well, it's one of these mysterious Fitzcarraldo editions, which I sort of love so much. They're very minimalist. They have these beautiful either dark blue or white covers. So they're either white type reversed out of a dark blue cover, or they're dark blue type on a white cover, and there's no picture. It's that kind of French thing where they do the sort of just the white book.
It's very chic.
Yeah, very, very chic. But also it led me to reflect on how much we get from a cover, how much a cover tells us. And when you take that image away, on the one hand, I think it's kind of a good thing. I think it really allows the novel to speak for itself and they don't push any kind of image your way. But in another way, I do think perhaps it makes things slightly daunting. You know, if you're going to commit some time to reading something, it'll be hard or intense, or you just don't know what you're getting into.
Yeah, that's how I would feel about it.
I just can't quite decide if I think it's a good thing or not, but they are such beautiful editions. They're so beautifully typeset. I love everything about them. They're wonderful.
Did it live up to its appearance then?
Well, so the thing about Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead is it's kind of her take on a thriller noir genre novel, in as much as I think a writer who's so nuanced and thoughtful and interesting and so many other things besides can kind of do a sort of schlocky genre novel. I don't know. It's set in a remote Polish village and the main character is Janina Dujeko. I didn't ask the Poles about that, unfortunately, so I'm just going to have to hazard a guess with that one, but I think it's probably Dujeko. An elderly woman who we learn is mourning the loss of her 2 dogs. She's reclusive, preferring the company of animals to people. She's unconventional, believing in astrology and the stars. And she's fond of the poetry of William Blake, which she translates. A series of gruesome murders takes place in the sparsely populated area in which she lives, close to the border with the Czech Republic, and she gradually gets drawn into the investigation. Meanwhile, she has her own theory that the murder victims have in fact been killed by animals. And can I read you the first paragraph, which just gives you a little sense of the style?
Yeah, go on.
I am already at an age, and additionally in a state, where I must always wash my feet thoroughly before bed, in the event of having to be removed by an ambulance in the night. And night has a capital N, and just that tiny little emphasis, and it just kind of makes you smile, but also you're intrigued, and immediately you've got this sense of this older woman, and so much of her personality is kind of summed up in that one sentence.
Yeah, I can see that.
Really good. I mean, I read the first page and I just thought, this is going to be great. And I started reading and I liked it. It's quite sort of detailed, her writing, and quite complex, but in a sort of really pleasing way. But I didn't love it. I wasn't really gripped by it. And for a long time, I was sort of wondering where it was going. And it was only really towards the end when she starts to draw it all together. And you have this real sense of all these sort of chess pieces that she's put on the board. And suddenly you kind of become aware of the end game. And that was so brilliantly done and so pleasing and such a wonderful kind of drawing together of all the sort of complexity of this book, all kind of coalescing into this one closing narrative. It was just a delight. That was really great. And afterwards, I just found myself thinking back on it. And there are so many interesting ideas packed into it to do with identity, you know, this sense of this older woman. Because she's old and she's a woman, she's overlooked and ignored and marginalised. And what does that mean when that happens to you? And there's a real thing about hunting in it. It's quite a kind of strong anti-hunting thread. And as I understand it, in Poland, that has ignited a real debate about hunting, which is kind of an important part of rural culture there and what that means and what people think about that. Religion comes into it, politics to a certain degree. She uses this frame of this sort of genre novel to touch on all these interesting details, and it's just really brilliantly done. And then I started to research a bit about her, and the more I found out about her, the more intrigued I was, because she's just such an interesting woman. I don't know, the next one that's going to come out in English is a 900-page humdinger called The Book of Jacob, I think. It sounds like a more serious subject than Drive Your Plow. And I thought looked like it would probably be a bit intense. But I would definitely now want to go back and read Flights. I'm really looking forward to that now.
And have you discussed it yet with the Mum's Book Club?
No, so I wonder what they're going to make of it. I thought we were going to have the book club yesterday, so I finished it last week. But in fact, it's been postponed for a couple of weeks, and so I'm now unusually well prepared for my book club, because normally I'm a real last-minute merchant. But I think because quite a few people haven't managed to finish it, and so I wonder whether it's one of those ones a little bit like Milkman by Anna Burns, where you just need to make sure that you've got time to really be able to sink into it and concentrate on it to really appreciate it. But yeah, I think it would be great for book club.
Well, I'm feeling like my reading choices have been a little bit lightweight compared to yours. However, I'm going to take heart by the fact that you have yet to start my most recent book club book, Palace Walk by Naguib Mahfouz, the Nobel Prize winner.
I think I'm sort of in denial.
Which is 800 pages or so, a quite dense copy.
Why
which
would
I
you
have
choose
finished.
an 800-page book for book club? Mind you, mine are doing War and Peace, so I'm not one to talk.
So you're going to read Palace Walk, and then on our next bookshelf you won't have read anything other than silly light novels as palate cleansers, and I can redeem myself with some more serious reading.
Well, as a final thought, I'm also listening to on audio The Book You Wish Your Parents Had Read by Philippa Perry, which is a wonderful, wise look at parenting. I have 3 children who are all still quite young, and definitely have had, this sort of steep learning curve you go through of trying to figure out how best to look after them or bring them up. And it does seem extraordinary to me. In some ways, it is the most important job any of us will ever do. And yet, do we prepare for it? Do we research? Do we study? Do we go off for 3 years and do like a kind of, degree in it? We do any of those things. Most of us, I think, probably have a vague sense of what our parents did. And so we take from that the things that we thought that they did that were good. And we sort of reject the things that they did that we think weren't great. And we sort of vaguely try and come up with our own alternatives to that. But without much, it seems to me, real forethought. And the trouble is, you just don't want to get it wrong, because these are little human beings who are relying on you to bring them up, that they can kind of manage and function in our crazy society. And so I kind of do think that it's a good idea every once in a while to read something that might help you.
And it's good.
It's very good. Actually, it's not the first time I've come across Philippa Perry. She's a fairly well-known now psychotherapist and has written other books on therapy. And she actually has run a series of parenting workshops. And I did one of those years ago when I was really in the midst of it all with my two when they were very small. A lot of the helpful things that came out of that are now in this book in sort of longer form. It's very good in the way that it takes you through the kind of suggestions for how you might handle things that come up all the time. How to really react to your child when they come to you with their very sort of strong feelings and emotions about something. And often the tendency is to just be a bit dismissive because we're busy and maybe we don't really have time to deal with it, or for whatever reason, we're not really thinking about how they're feeling. We're just thinking about what we're feeling. And so we respond in a way that doesn't really help them deal with those feelings. And it was really interesting to me, the idea that actually we have to learn to contain their feelings without trying to fix them or make them go away, but just accept them for what they are. And then they feel heard and acknowledged. And she's full of really brilliant little examples from real life that she sprinkles in there, so that you sort of read the theory and you think, all right, okay. And then you have the nice little human example that really anchors it and you can really relate to. And then you start to think, oh, well, I could try that. And I had a nice thing. I'd just been telling a friend of mine, a mum friend, we were walking back from having picked up the girls at school, and we were going off to a cafe, and we were walking along and I was busy telling her about it. And I was saying, yeah, this thing she's talking about right now is really interesting and I'm definitely going to try this. And we were just deep in conversation. And who should round the corner coming the other way but Philippa Perry, who's very distinctive because she sort of has this fabulous, amazing kind of bright orange glasses and sort of quite dramatic hair and instantly recognisable. And I wouldn't normally stop someone to bother them, but she was just right there, and it was just so. And I was just like, oh, how amazing! We're just talking about your book. That's so strange. And she was very nice, and she stopped, and I told her how much I was getting out of it, and she said that was good. And I was like, yeah, the amazing thing is, it really works. I'm really finding the things that you're saying, and I'm trying them. They really work. And she sort of looked, almost hesitated slightly, and she said, well, it's not supposed to work. It's supposed to be about helping build a different kind of a relationship, and that's really the goal. And I was like, well, I think that's what I mean in terms of it working, because I think that is
such a psychotherapist response.
I think afterwards, when I was thinking about it, I was thinking, I wonder if it's almost like it's not supposed to be that there's something broken and this is going to help you fix it.
No, it feels like an improvement.
It's not a binary thing like that. It's more, it's going to help you on this journey that you're going on with your child, to perhaps be a little bit wiser, a little bit more prepared, and able to deal with things as they come up a bit better in a way that's hopefully going to then have a really positive impact on the relationship that you both have. I just love that. I thought it was great. There's a nice quote from Nigella Lawson on the publisher's website. So clear and true, helpful for all relationships in life, not just parent-child. And I thought, yes, actually, as I've been listening to it and as I've been thinking about it, I don't think in any way a lot of it is really just only for the relationship between parents and children. You really feel like I could apply this to anyone. I could apply this to my husband. I could apply this to you, Laura. Next time we're having an argument about some aspect of our marketing policy.
Probably social media.
Yeah. It's just really good to just reflect on all that and have a little bit of, I don't know, that kind of wise guiding voice that absolutely you can take or leave. She's not saying this is the only way, this is the best way, you must do things this way. She's just offering you something that you might find helpful. And I love that. I've been listening to the audiobook, which she reads, and that is good. But I suspect probably you would want to have the physical copy of this. I think it's just the kind of thing where you're going to want to fold corners. You're probably going to want to underline things. And there are also these exercises that you probably would want to then sit down and have a bit more time over. Whereas in the audio, they're just sort of read out and you slide quickly past them. But yeah, recommended.
Very good.
And that's it.
It's not quite.
Oh my goodness, is there another one? We were worried we wouldn't have enough to talk about.
That's true. I've only just started this book, which is The Age of Light by Whitney Scharer. And it was loaned to me by my friend Frances, because both she and I know quite a bit about Lee Miller, who was a very beautiful fashion model in her late teens, early 20s. She then went on to be an incredible surrealist photographer and was trained by Man Ray, who was also her lover, in Paris in the 1930s. She then became a war correspondent and took incredibly moving photographs of the Buchenwald concentration camp. And when she came back from that experience, she never really quite recovered. She was married to Roland Penrose, who was an artist and the founder of the Institute of Contemporary Art in London. And then they moved down to the Sussex Downs, where she had this beautiful house and would gather people together, but struggled with alcohol addiction and depression. And it's this incredible life. And Frances was like, I couldn't believe no one had written about it as yet. And now Whitney Scharer has. So this just came out earlier this year. I know Lee Miller very well because I edited a book about her and her fashion photography, which was kind of just a side thing she did. I don't think she was ever all that passionate about it. But because she had such close ties to Vogue and Condé Nast, she took a lot of photography for Vogue during the 1940s. It's very strange to read about a historical figure where you know a lot about their life already, because you can't quite sink into the fact that this is a literary creation, or you can, but it's a little bit jarring. So she had a very odd relationship with her father. It was quite loving, but there was always worries that maybe it had crossed some sort of sexual boundary when she was young, because he would take nude photographs of her when she was kind of a prepubescent teen, and there's just something a little bit creepy about that. And she was sexually molested as a teenage girl. It was supposed to be someone in the extended family, but was it? I don't know. Her son, she had a son with Roland Penrose, is incredibly protective of her legacy and did not authorize this biography, did not give the author access to any journals, any family memorabilia. So Whitney Scharer has had to be very clear that this is her creative interpretation of what is known in the public realm about Lee Miller's life. It's quite well written.
Is it fiction or is it non-fiction?
Oh, it's fiction. Yeah. And it focuses on Lee Miller in Paris, her meeting with Man Ray and their relationship and her training as a photographer. So I'm just starting it. It'll be interesting. So far, I'm not wildly impressed by the writing, but I think I just need to keep going and see what I think.
See where it goes. Well, I'd say it sounds interesting and that maybe I'd like to read it too, but I just got a stack of books a mile high.
I know. I'm excited to be finally working through my stack. That's all for this episode. On our next book club show, we'll be discussing I Will Never See the World Again by Ahmet Altan, one of many writers imprisoned by Recep Erdogan's oppressive regime in Turkey. The book is a series of essays that were smuggled out from Altan's prison cell by his lawyer. Powerful stuff, but did it make for a good book club discussion? Listen in to find out.
And if you haven't caught it already, our last book club show was on Golden Hill by Francis Bufford. Listen in to hear us discuss this rollicking romp of a historical novel and find out what Laura's book club made of it. We were joined by Phyllis Richardson, author of The House of Fiction, who tells us some juicy details that came out of her research into writers and their houses, both real and imaginary.
If you'd like to see what we're up to between episodes, follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Book Club Review Podcast, on Twitter at Book Club RVW Pod, or email us at thebookclubreview@gmail.com. And if you're not already, why not subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts?
But for now, thanks for listening and happy reading.